Alright guys, welcome. I'm going to be talking today about the Toronto Defiant and how they almost beat the Philadelphia Fusion. We saw a match that I think a lot of people predicted not to be close. Philadelphia Fusion have been playing incredibly well, and especially in this McCree main meta. But we came into a weird scenario in which it looked like it was lost for the Toronto Defiant, and they eventually just clawed their way back and almost ended up winning the series. Philadelphia Fusion took a 3-2 in a nail-biter of a last map. They did lose 2-0 on the rounds, but they were incredibly close, determined by a pick going either way on both rounds. So I kind of wanted to dissect. I talked about this a lot on my stream, and if you want to go check that out, here's the link. Go check out my Twitch VOD, and I talk about it for a couple of hours. But I kind of want to summarize my points and sort of underline the issues that I saw for Philadelphia Fusion and why Toronto actually did almost take it. And the first point that I really think is important when you're looking at this match was it had to be Surefour on the McCree. I think he came out and he provided something completely different for this roster. We saw in the first map Logic's play. They played Logic's agilities, and Logic's just didn't seem to get any value. If I remember correctly, they only got 3 final blows in that entire map. All 3 of them were Logic's, but it just felt like the Toronto Defiant team just didn't have any space at all throughout the entire series of that map. So what was going wrong? It felt like Carpe was playing the game for almost for free. And the reason it turned around for the Toronto Defiant later in the series was that Surefour started playing to mirror Carpe, because Carpe is playing a very flank style gameplay and also sort of like, I would say, mischievous. He's not taking the front on duel. He's not really just shooting shields, but he's taking all these off angles and getting a lot of value and sort of keeping Toronto on their toes. So when you saw Surefour come in, he actually ended up playing it, and you saw it a lot on King's Row, where he takes an angle, he ends up just sort of in the backline of the Philadelphia Fusion. He gets a pick, he's giving more space in terms of Poco has to deal with the McCree more. And he actually got a lot of important picks that ended up winning them that series on that map. And they ended up like running it through the whole time. And the funniest thing that I remember seeing is just Surefour and Carpe just crouching behind different corners, just trying to control each other and stop each other from sort of taking these angles. And the funniest thing about it is that I don't actually think Surefour has better aim than Logic's. I would say on the eye test, Logic's has better aim, but it sort of shows you the depth that comes with McCree, and players need to have more understanding of how they can get value regardless of just shooting at things. And I think Surefour underlined that incredibly well and showed how you can get more value on McCree by being a threat rather than just being frontline pressure. And I think that was like a big deciding factor for why Toronto won King's Row and it got so close in map 5. And then if you want to go into a different important topic, if you watched it, the flexibility of agilities was incredible in this series. So on Anubis, it didn't look good for them. It looked like they were down and out. They struggled to attack. But on the defense, the Toronto Defiant actually ended up playing a Sombra Doomfist on the second point defense, and it actually got crazy amounts of value. This is one of the strongest points for Doomfist in the game, because there's so many corners, so many chokes, so many close respawns, so the Doomfist can just go ham. And with Surefour also on the Sombra, it just felt like it was so oppressive for the Philadelphia Fusion to deal with, and it sort of caught them off guard. You saw Carpe switching from McCree to Reaper, just sort of all over the place, trying to find the solution to the problem. And Toronto should have almost full-held this. They just sort of messed up their Eldritch cycle in one of the last fights that really just sort of undid it all for them. But this can't be underlined how valuable it is, and you see this from New York Excelsior and the Vancouver Titans, that they have the flexibility of the rosters that they play to play Doomfist at the drop of a hat, to play Genji at the drop of a hat, and it'd be incredibly oppressive, especially if you're not matching up in the mirror, which we saw that the Toronto Defiant just weren't. They weren't able to get anything done at this point. They just couldn't really get a foothold, and Philly was just better. And we've seen Philly do this against multiple teams. So that's why it was really interesting to see the Toronto Defiant just bring in the flexibility of agilities, not only on Anubis, but then bring it to Dorado. On Dorado, you saw Brady play Doomfist, play Doomfist pretty much the entire time. He also played Genji. a lot. And even though his Genji wasn't getting a ton of value, Philadelphia Fusion were playing incredibly defensive. Just the sheer existence of Genji was forcing Philly to play in a way that they didn't want to. And you saw the Toronto Defiant. It wasn't the cleanest dive. It wasn't the best dive. But it was good enough to tilt the Philadelphia Fusion off balance. And that's what Toronto did a really good job of doing is they couldn't match up against Philly in the proper way, so they played something that could tilt them off balance. And that's like a massive asset for the Toronto Defiant, being able to sort of have this in their back pocket where they just want to go dive, especially going into hero pools, because I think players being able to just switch into something and just sort of YOLO is going to be important, because if you get stuck in this one style of play, it gets very easy to counter. And that's sort of where Philadelphia got stuck, is that they couldn't adjust their play because they're happy with how they're playing. They're just trying to play the meta the best. So when it stopped working against the Toronto Defiant, they really struggled to find their footing again. And the last point that I would say of why Toronto almost got it from Philly is Kariv somehow keeps getting away with it. I don't know how he does it. The man is a mad lad. But he just hit counter nade after counter nade, just hitting big ones. You saw it on Kings Row multiple times, just engaging with these 6-man bio-nades. He has a ton of different setups with his anonades as well. We saw it on Temple of Anubis. We saw it on Kings Row. I think we saw one on Dorado as well. Like, so he has all these great setups for all of his nades, and he's getting so much value that Anna's really shouldn't get. And because we saw Surefour and Agilities playing in a way that creates so much space and takes attention away from Poco, Kariv just seemed to sort of be playing the game for free and sort of not getting punished whenever he was doing these crazy things. In a moment on Kings Row, he literally walks through the Mei wall into the enemy Reinhardt and the Diva, tries to throw a nade, gets eaten, and he just walks away. He ends up dodging the shatter because he's so far forward that he's behind the enemy Reinhardt. So I don't know how he keeps doing it, but he does. And there was just so many clutch moments that Kariv had in this series that without Kariv, I think this would have been a 3-0 and it wouldn't have had the turns that we expected. So with all this said though, I want to underline that Philly is the better team. They deserve to win. And I think if this team was to play, 10 matches, Philly would win at, I would say, 9 out of the 10 times. And I think it wouldn't always be particularly close like we saw this series. I think you saw Toronto overperforming at times and Philadelphia Fusion underperforming at times. I think a prime example of when Philadelphia underperformed was on Kings Row in the overtime push from the Toronto Defiant. The Toronto Defiant ended up isolating Ivy. Ivy gets caught, and the Philadelphia Fusion, their response in an overtime defense after losing their Mei was to beat engage. And what happened is Philadelphia Fusion felt the need to keep committing ults because they need to commit to try and win, because once you commit the beat, you need to just keep going. And you saw them use all their ult, and that is why the Toronto Defiant 6-capped on Kings Row. Just because of these mistakes that are sort of just like team synergy that just didn't really work out there. And then I think another important factor here for the Philadelphia Fusion is Ivy has been incredibly good on the Mei, probably one of the best. I remember looking at his stat lines. It's incredible. He's a very good player. But he did not have a good series, especially on Kings Row, especially on Dorado. He had a really tough time getting Mei ults down against the dive that the Toronto Defiant were playing. And on Kings Row in general, I don't know how many ults he had eaten. I think it would be above 4. And it's just, you need to give credit to Nevix, but it's also at that point, the Mei needs to be more careful and Ivy needs to be more careful. So it wasn't even like Agilities was playing an incredibly good game on the Mei. He was also struggling to get value out of his Mei ults. But if Ivy had stepped up, this could have been a very different series. It could have ended 3-1 on Kings Row. So I don't think you need to be fooled by this storyline of, is Toronto like a top 8 team? Because I think a lot of people are putting Philly like top 5 with their performances of how they've been playing so far. They haven't played the best teams, Philadelphia, but they have been consistently good against all these teams. Toronto was the first time we really saw them stumble. But I don't think you can overrate Toronto here. I think you need to keep this team level at about top 12, maybe sort of hovering around there. If your biggest asset as a Toronto Defiant fan is that they are incredibly flexible, they have Surefour, they have Agilities, they have Kariv, they have players that are willing and able to play everything, and you've seen that. So can they keep, tilting teams off, imbalancing them with their different strategies and their willingness to just sort of play whatever? They weren't the best at it, but they were strong. And you can, if you're willing if you're able to push Philadelphia Fusion to the edge, then that's a great sign for them. But as Philadelphia Fusion, they, historically as a team, they've always played down to the level of the team that they're playing against. In season 1 and season 2, they've just never really been able to just sort of dominate all the time, and we haven't seen that from them this season. So far, they've been incredibly clean, but this was the first time I ever watched them play. I'm like, wow, this is just mistake after mistake from Philadelphia Fusion. They were forced errors by the Toronto Defiant, but Philadelphia need to be cleaner, because if they are trying to push for this, this grand finals run, they need to be better. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more of both of these teams. We are going to see them coming up, but once we have hero pools come in, it's going to be anyone's game. So I'm really looking forward to it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I think it's interesting. I want to make a video like this of the most interesting match that happened each week. So if you enjoyed it, comment on who you'd like to see and all that kind of stuff. And much love.